So far, we've really only been talking about the price elasticity of demand, but we can also talk about the price elasticity of supply. We're going to cover this relatively quickly because it's very, very similar to kind of what we somewhat slowly went over with the price elasticity of demand. So what the price elasticity of supply is going to be measuring is, instead of the responsiveness of buyers to changes in price, it's going to be the responsiveness of sellers to changes in price. So the responsiveness of quantity supplied to changes in price. So a lot of times it will be eta with a little s to indicate supply, or could be an epsilon instead. Doesn't matter how your notation, as long as it's clear it's about the elasticity of supply, you define it somewhere. And this is going to be the percentage change in QS over the percentage change in price. Again, we're going to be using the midpoint method. Notice that it's going to be greater than 0 because of this positive relationship, so we don't need to take the absolute value anymore. But we're going to use the midpoint method to calculate it, just like we did for the price elasticity of demand. There's also determinants of the price elasticity of supply. And so, the real determinant is going to be how easy it is for them to change their quantity supply to changes in price. So it might be really hard with their production process to change how much they're supplying to the market on quick notice from some change in price. And just like demand, we have the same 5 classifications. Same 5 classifications. In terms of, we can have a perfectly elastic supply curve, an elastic supply curve, an unit elastic supply curve, an inelastic supply curve, or a perfectly inelastic supply curve. It's the same classifications as we had for the demand curve. So I don't think we need to go over them again, but it's the same way of calculating it, the same way of classifying it into these different 5 classifications. And the determinants are basically how easy it is to change your production from a change in price. So some producers are going to have an easy time changing their production if price changes. Some will have a much harder time. And usually we think in the long run, the supply is going to be more elastic than in the short run, just like demand. So there's 2 other elasticities that are quite important that we should talk about. So we talked about price elasticity of demand, and we talked about price elasticity of supply just now, pretty quickly. Let's talk about 2 other elasticities that I think are somewhat that are important. The first is going to be the income elasticity of demand. So as the name suggests, this is starting to think about how sensitive quantity demanded is to changes in income. So how sensitive quantity demanded is to changes in income. So we calculate it the exact same way. Good. Maybe you use Y for income or M for income. And it's going to be the percentage change in quantity demanded. Again, we're going to use the midpoint method over the percentage change in income. We're denoting income as Y here, just to make that clear. So if this is greater than 0, it means as your income goes up, then the quantity demanded of that good goes up. So this is going to be a normal good. So we kind of started learning about these different kinds of goods and supply and demand, now we're kind of formalizing the definition of what it is. So a normal good is a good whose income elasticity of demand is going to be greater than 0. So as your income goes up by 1%, the quantity demanded goes up by a positive percent, some greater than 0. The opposite is going to be an inferior good. So now as your income goes up, your quantity demanded of this good is falling. And then the second, well, I can fit it in here, the second is going to be the cross price elasticity. And so this is going to measure the responsiveness in the price of one good to another. So let's imagine we have two goods, X1 and X2. And so this is going to measure how sensitive QD for X1 is to price changes in X2. Right? So one of the factors that affected the demand curve for good X1 is the price of related goods. Let's say X2 is related somehow. Remember that we started thinking about complements and substitutes there. And so again, we're going to calculate it. It's a really bad eta. X1, X2. Just going to denote it X1 and X2. So changes in X1 from quantity demanded of X1 from changes in price of X2. It's going to be the percentage change in QD from good X1 from percentage change in the price of good X2. So we're looking at how the effective price of X2 on the quantity demanded of X1. So if the price of good 2 goes up and the quantity demanded of X1 goes up, so if this is greater than 0, that's going to mean they're substitutes, because the price of the other good goes up, which means the price of substitute goes up in this case, I guess. Price of a substitute goes up and the quantity demanded of our good goes up, of X1 goes up. Remember, that was the relationship for substitutes. If it's less than 0, that means a price increase in X2 is causing the quantity demanded of good 1 to go down. Well, that was the definition of what a complement was, right? Because if the price of X2 goes up and their complement's the bundle that we're trying to buy together, we like to consume these things in a bundle, the bundle's becoming more expensive. So these would be complements. We'd calculate them the same way. We'd use the midpoint method in this course to do that. In other courses, you might use other methods, but that's the idea. All right, so now we can think of another big application of elasticity, which is going to be excise taxes.